All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the invisible forces that dictate why massive corporate giants fall apart and how tiny garage startups somehow take their place. If you've ever wondered what actually separates the companies that shape our future from the ones that just fade into history, well, you are in the right place. Today, we're going to decode the definitive managerial theories that totally govern business survival.
Seriously, ask yourself, how is it even possible that legacy incumbents with endless R&D budgets continually get disrupted by tiny, underfunded teams? It seems completely backwards, right? I mean, a company with a $100 million war chest should theoretically crush a startup operating out of a dorm room. Yet, economic history tells us the exact opposite happens all the time.
To figure out why, we're going to walk through the ultimate startup life cycle, breaking down decades of complex managerial theories into 5 clear stages: finding the hidden spark, timing and market entry, designing the startup engine, scaling through the chaos, and finally, the burden of responsibility.
Let's move straight into stage 1, finding the hidden spark.
Now, a disruptive idea rarely starts in a vacuum. It actually usually begins inside the very giants that are about to get disrupted. Think about the knowledge filter. Big companies generate incredible innovations, but they are honestly terrible at using them. Why? Because they reject any idea that doesn't serve their immediate current profit model. This perfectly explains why Xerox PARC successfully invented the modern graphical user interface in the 1970s, but their management totally ignored it. Simply put, it didn't help them sell more copy machines, so the knowledge was just trapped.
But here's the thing. Knowledge is incredibly leaky. When rigid corporate bureaucracies suppress innovation, they inevitably trigger massive strategic disagreements. And what happens? Brilliant employees spin out and launch rivals. Look at the famous traitorous 8. In 1957, 8 brilliant scientists were blocked from pursuing new silicon tech by their boss at Shockley Semiconductor. So they all just resigned en masse, took their unexploited expertise, and founded Fairchild Semiconductor. They essentially birthed Silicon Valley as we know it today, just from that one leak.
Okay, so the knowledge is out there. That brings us to stage 2, timing and market entry.
If you're building a business, your timing is quite literally everything. You've got 2 main plays here. You can be a first mover, like the Sony Walkman, building this unassailable manufacturing lead and riding the experience curve down to super low costs. But waiting can be just as powerful. If you act as a second mover, like the Apple iPod did, you get to bypass that incredibly expensive early phase. Apple didn't invent the MP3 player. They just let everyone else spend millions making mistakes and educating consumers, and then swooped in with flawless execution.
And when you do enter, you have to avoid a major trap. According to competence destruction theory, startups should almost always wield competence-destroying innovations. These are innovations that render the giant's existing operations totally obsolete. Think about when Netflix introduced streaming. Blockbuster's thousands of physical stores suddenly transformed from a massive asset into a completely crippling liability. As a startup, you win when you change the rules so drastically that the giant's greatest strengths become their absolute worst weaknesses.
You have the idea, you have the timing, now let's build the machine. Moving to stage 3, designing the startup engine. At the very heart of leadership is this profound governance paradox. You kind of have to decide right away how you view human nature. Agency theory assumes your leaders are self-interested and need strict, heavy-handed policing. And hey, that's exactly the cynical approach that caused Apple's board to fire Steve Jobs back in 1985. On the flip side, you have stewardship theory. This assumes your managers are intrinsically motivated for the greater good and thrive on trust. That model fueled Southwest Airlines' historic multi-decade profitability. If you treat a visionary like a cynical agent, you'll absolutely kill the drive that built the company in the first place.
And who you choose to trust matters immensely. According to Upper Echelons Theory, your startup's strategic direction is never just some cold, rational math problem. It is a direct reflection of your top management team's cognitive filters, their biases, their ages, and their diverse backgrounds. Your company becomes a mirror of your C-suite. If your leaders are highly heterogeneous, meaning they come from wildly different backgrounds, you're going to see a ton of innovation, though, yeah, it might slow down consensus a bit. Plus, you aren't just building a product. Contract theory shows us that the founder is essentially the central contractor. A company is basically a nexus of contracts, holding together this fragile web of handshakes, equity agreements, and incentives, just trying to survive uncertainty. The founder solves the hold-up problem with suppliers, prevents fights with vesting schedules, and fundamentally acts as the residual claimant. That means everyone else gets paid first, and the entrepreneur keeps whatever is left over, which is exactly why founders are so incredibly motivated to innovate. Okay,
The internal engine is designed, contracts are signed, next challenge? Stage 4, scaling through the chaos. As you blow this thing up, you have to pick your battles carefully. Startups often heavily exploit architectural innovation, which basically means taking existing, known components and combining them in a brand new way. Why do they do this? Because it paralyzes rigidly structured industry giants. The giants' entire supply chain and communication channels are hardwired for the old architecture. They literally cannot pivot fast enough to counter the new linkages you've just created.
But as the venture grows, your brain has to evolve with it. The founder has to exhibit individual ambidexterity. You have to shift your mental model from that chaotic early-stage exploration, where you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall to find product-market fit, to rigorous late-stage exploitation, where you are intensely standardizing processes. Let's be real, a founder who can only dream up ideas but never execute them will absolutely stall out during the growth phase.
And to survive massive disruptions in a fast-moving market, David Teese's dynamic capabilities framework proves you cannot just sit on your current assets. You must constantly cycle through 3 steps: sensing new opportunities, seizing them by mobilizing capital, and aggressively transforming your organization to ditch obsolete models. This is precisely how Netflix systematically pivoted from mail-order DVDs to streaming to producing their own massive original content. They never, ever stopped transforming.
By continuously transforming, you protect what's known as your VRIO bundle. Your goal is to build internal resources that are valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized. If you manage to hit all 4 of these criteria, you achieve a true, sustainable competitive advantage. Shopify proved this perfectly. Sure, anyone could write basic e-commerce code, but Shopify built a deeply integrated, highly trusted merchant ecosystem that was exceptionally difficult for rivals to imitate.
Which brings us to our 5th and final stage, the burden of responsibility. Once your startup actually starts impacting society, you face this agonizing tension known as ethical dualism. You have a functional duty to make a profit and secure capital, sure, but you also have a moral duty to not wreck society. And these 2 things clash constantly. For instance, choosing to deeply protect user privacy might literally cost you a massive data monetization deal. It is a permanent structural tension that every founder eventually has to wrestle with.
And part of that responsibility is managing how the world perceives you, which ties right into optimal distinctiveness theory. It's the ultimate paradox. You have to ground yourself in enough familiar standards, a legitimacy anchor, so the market actually trusts you. But simultaneously, you need a sharp distinctiveness spike so you don't just blend in. If you are too similar to everyone else, you suffer the death of invisibility. But if you are too weird, you suffer the death of illegitimacy. You have to thread that needle perfectly.
Ultimately, building a company is an ongoing political and moral negotiation. It's not just a sterile economic calculation. You are building a complex web of human relationships, structural architectures, and really tough ethical trade-offs. The managerial theories we've explored today prove that true, long-term success isn't just about having a cool product. It is about mastering the organizational engine behind it.
So, the final question you really must ask yourself when writing your own founder's playbook is this: how will you design your organizational architecture to not just capture value, but to responsibly shape the future? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this changes how you view the invisible mechanics of the business world. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.